The morning mist clung to the manicured hedges of the Sterling estate in East Hampton like a shroud of expensive silk. At 68, Eleanor Sterling had learned that silence in a house this large wasn't a sign of peace. It was a sign of secrets. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her primary suite, a cup of Earl Grey warming her palms. Outside, a small army of florists and caterers scurried across the lawn, transforming her private sanctuary into a stage for her granddaughter Claire's wedding. Eleanor caught her reflection in the glass. She looked exactly as the world expected a Sterling widow to look, elegant, composed, and faded. Her silver hair was coiffed into a soft French twist, and her pale blue Chanel suit, the one Elias had bought her for their 40th anniversary, fit her perfectly. But behind her calm eyes, a storm was brewing. She remembered the day Elias died, 3 years ago. He had gripped her hand in the hospital, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Don't let them tear it down, Ellie. Not the money, the family. Keep them together." She had tried. God, how she had tried. But as she watched her son, Julian, barking orders at a florist down on the lawn, she realized she wasn't keeping a family together. She was funding a charade. A sharp knock at the door broke her reverie. Julian didn't wait for an answer before stepping inside. At 45, he carried the Sterling name with a desperate sort of arrogance. His suit was too expensive, his tan too orange, and his smile never quite reached his eyes. "Mother, you're still not dressed?" he asked, glancing at his Rolex. "The guests will be arriving at the St. Regis in 4 hours. We need to move." "I am dressed, Julian," Eleanor said quietly, setting her tea on the mahogany vanity. "I was just taking a moment." Julian sighed, the sound of a man burdened by an incompetent subordinate. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a gold-embossed envelope. "Listen, there's been a slight hiccup with the lighting designer for the reception. Something about a premium surcharge for the weekend. I need you to authorize a transfer. Just $200,000. It's a drop in the bucket for the estate." Eleanor felt a familiar tightening in her chest. Over the last 2 years, these drops in the bucket had totaled nearly $4 million. Julian's lifestyle as a CEO was a hollow shell. He spent more than he earned, relying on the family fund to bridge the gaps. $200,000 for lighting, Julian? We already paid the decorator nearly $500,000, Eleanor said, her voice steady but firm. Julian's face darkened for a split second before the mask of the dutiful son slid back into place. "Claire only gets married once, Mother. Do you want her walking into a ballroom that looks like a basement? Or is this about the money again? You know I'm managing the firm's transition. Things are tight, but they'll settle." He placed the check and a pen on her vanity. It was a gold-plated fountain pen, a gift Eleanor had given him when he graduated from Wharton. "I'll sign it," Eleanor said, "but I want to see the itemized invoices after the honeymoon." Of course," Julian muttered, already halfway out the door as she scribbled her name. He didn't thank her. He didn't even look at her. To him, she was simply the vault that held his inheritance. The St. Regis, New York was a temple of Beaux-Arts glamour, all gold leaf and crystal chandeliers. It was the kind of place where the Sterlings felt they belonged. As Eleanor arrived, the air was thick with the scent of 5,000 white roses. She looked for Claire in the bridal suite. Her granddaughter was beautiful, a vision in Vera Wang, but she was surrounded by a swarm of influencer friends, all clutching champagne flutes and recording every second on their phones. "Grandma, you're here!" Claire cried, offering her a cheek to kiss. "Did you see the cake? It's 6 tiers, and the favors are Tiffany crystal." "It's lovely, dear," Eleanor said, smoothing Claire's veil. "You look radiant. Your grandfather would have been so proud." Claire's smile faltered for a second, a flicker of something. Guilt? Or perhaps just annoyance at the mention of the past. "Yeah, totally. Oh, Vivian, did the photographer get the shot of the shoes?" Vivian, Julian's wife, swept into the room like a hurricane in Dior. She was a woman who saw life as a series of social conquests. "Eleanor, darling," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You look classic. Julian is looking for you. He says there's a seating change." Seating change. The words felt like a cold breeze. The ceremony was a blur of high church formality. Eleanor sat in the front row, clutching her vintage handkerchief. She watched Claire exchange vows with her fiancé, a young man from a tech dynasty whose parents looked at Eleanor as if she were a museum exhibit. Valuable, but dusty. It was during the transition to the grand ballroom for the reception that the first crack appeared in Eleanor's world. As the guests filed into the ballroom, Eleanor walked toward the VIP table near the dance floor, the table where the parents and grandparents traditionally sat. She looked for her name card. Julian and Vivian were there. The groom's parents were there. Even Vivian's distant cousins from Connecticut had seats at the head table. Eleanor's name was not among them. She felt a flush of heat rise to her neck. She looked around, confused. A young wedding planner with a headset noticed her standing there. "Mrs. Sterling, can I help you find your seat?" the girl asked. "There seems to be a mistake. I don't see my card at the family table." The girl checked her tablet, her expression turning into one of practiced sympathy. "Oh no, Mrs. Sterling, you're at table 42. It's right this way." Eleanor followed her. Table 42 was not near the dance floor. It was in the far back corner of the ballroom, tucked behind a large marble pillar and dangerously close to the service entrance where waiters were rushing in and out with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Sitting at the table were her late husband's retired accountant and a couple of distant great-aunts who were so old they could barely see the stage. Eleanor looked down at her place setting. There was a beautifully calligraphed card waiting for her. It didn't say Eleanor Sterling, grandmother of the bride. It didn't even say matriarch of the Sterling family. In elegant, scrolling ink, it read, "The sponsor." The air felt thin. The sponsor. Not a mother, not a grandmother, not a woman who had spent 40 years building the legacy they were currently standing on. She was a checkbook. She was a transaction. She sat down, her legs feeling like lead. From her vantage point behind the pillar, she could only see half of the head table. She saw Julian laughing, clinking glasses with a senator. She saw Vivian leaning over to whisper something to a fashion editor. Eleanor's great-aunt Martha leaned in. "Eleanor? Is that you? Why are we back here in the dark? I can't hear a thing the band is playing." "I don't know, Martha," Eleanor whispered. "I don't know." Determined not to make a scene, Eleanor waited until the first course was served. She needed to breathe. She stood up and moved toward the hallway, intending to find the powder room. As she passed through the heavy velvet curtains that separated the ballroom from the bar area, she heard a familiar voice. It was Julian. He was standing near the bar with the groom's father, Bill. They both had glasses of expensive scotch in their hands. "She's fine, Bill," Julian was saying, his voice carrying that tone of casual dismissiveness that Eleanor recognized too well. "We put her at the quiet table. She gets overwhelmed by the noise these days. To be honest, her mind isn't what it used to be. Ça saute tritoyer, dementia, is a slow burn, you know. She's mostly just a figurehead now." Bill chuckled. "Well, as long as she can still sign those checks, right?" "Exactly," Julian said, clinking his glass against Bill's. "She's the sponsor. That's her only job now. I've already got the lawyers drafting the paperwork to take over the estate management fully. For her own protection, of course. She's becoming difficult, irritable, typical signs of the decline." Eleanor froze behind the curtain. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Ça saute tritoyer?" Her mind was as sharp as the diamonds on her fingers. She still managed the household accounts. She still read the Wall Street Journal every morning. And she still remembered exactly what Elias had told her on his deathbed. Julian wasn't just spending her money. He was character assassinating her to justify stealing the rest of it. She turned away before they could see her, her eyes stinging with tears of pure, cold fury. She didn't go to the powder room. She walked toward the balcony overlooking the city. The Manhattan skyline was a sea of lights, indifferent to her pain. For 3 years, she had played the role of the grieving, quiet widow. She had let them take and take and take, thinking she was buying their love. She was wrong. She was only buying their contempt. "Grandma?" Eleanor turned. It was Leo, her 20-year-old grandson, Claire's younger brother. Unlike the rest of them, Leo was dressed in a suit that looked slightly too big for him, his hair a bit messy. He was a student of archaeology, more interested in the dust of the past than the glitter of the present. He was holding 2 plates of appetizers. "I saw where they sat you. It's total crap, Grandma. I'm moving my chair to your table." Eleanor felt a lump in her throat. She reached out and touched his arm. "No, Leo, stay at the head table. You're the brother of the bride." "I don't care," Leo said, his eyes flashing with a genuine anger that mirrored her own. "I heard what Mom and Dad were saying in the limo on the way here. They're talking about you like you're a piece of furniture they need to move to the attic. It's not right. You're the one who paid for Claire's college. You're the one who saved the firm when Dad made those bad trades in 2024. Why are they doing this? Eleanor took a deep breath, the cold New York air clearing the fog in her head. Because, Leo, they think I'm invisible. They think that because I'm quiet, I'm gone. She looked at her grandson, the only one who still saw her. Leo, I need you to do something for me. I need you to keep your ears open. Don't let them know you're upset. Just listen. Can you do that for me? Leo nodded slowly. Whatever you need, Grandma. Go back inside, she said, her voice regaining a strength it hadn't held in years. Enjoy the party. Let them think they've won, for now. As Leo headed back into the ballroom, Eleanor didn't follow. She pulled her phone from her clutch and dialed a number she hadn't called in a long time. Arthur? She said when the line picked up. It's Eleanor Sterling. I hope I'm not interrupting your weekend. I need to see the codicil to Elias's will. The one he said I should only open if the house started to rot. Yes, tomorrow morning, my house. And Arthur. Don't tell Julian. The next morning, the Sterling estate was a graveyard of party favors and wilted flowers. Julian and Vivian were still in the city, likely sleeping off the champagne in a hotel suite Eleanor had paid for. Arthur Vance arrived at 9 a.m. He was a man of 80, with white hair and the poker face of a high-stakes gambler. He had been Elias's best friend and the family's legal architect for 50 years. They sat in the library, the room smelling of old leather and the ghost of Elias's pipe tobacco. Arthur placed a thick, cream-colored envelope on the desk. Elias was a brilliant man, Eleanor, Arthur said, his voice heavy with a mix of respect and sadness. But he was also a man who knew his own son's weaknesses. He loved Julian, but he didn't trust him. He saw the entitlement growing in him like a weed. Eleanor opened the envelope. Her hands were steady now. The codicil is very specific, Arthur explained. Elias left you the majority of the liquid assets and the property outright. But he set up a secondary trust for the descendants, Julian, Claire, and Leo. However, he added a moral fitness clause. He called it the legacy protection provision. Eleanor read the legal jargon, her eyes narrowing. In plain English, Arthur continued, if any descendant is found to be actively working to undermine your health, your reputation, or your control over the estate for their own financial gain, or if they subject you to public humiliation, they forfeit everything. Their current allowances, their future inheritance, even the homes they live in that are owned by the Sterling Trust. Eleanor looked up. Public humiliation, like a name tag at a wedding that calls me a sponsor instead of a grandmother? Arthur's eyebrows rose. Did they really do that? And sitting me by the kitchen door, and telling business associates that I have dementia so they can seize power of attorney. Arthur's face went cold. That would certainly qualify. But Eleanor, enforcing this is a nuclear option. It will tear the family apart. You'll be the one holding the match. Eleanor looked at a photograph on the desk. It was of Julian as a little boy, sitting on his father's shoulders. She had spent his whole life protecting him, from his own failures, from his own temper, from the consequences of his actions. And in return, he was trying to erase her. The family is already torn, Arthur, Eleanor said. I'm just the only one who stopped pretending the seams are holding. I won't be pushed into a quiet home while they spend Elias's hard-earned money on Ferraris and designer handbags. What do you want to do? Arthur asked. I'm not going to sue them. Not yet, Eleanor said, a slow, predatory calm settling over her. Julian thinks I'm losing my mind. I'm going to let him keep thinking that. I want to see exactly how far he's willing to go. I want to see who in this family is still worth saving. She stood up and walked to the window. I need you to start a quiet audit of the Sterling firm. I suspect Julian hasn't just been spending my money. I think he's been borrowing from the corporate tax accounts. If I'm going to do this, I want to be able to take away more than just his inheritance. I want to take away his mask. Over the next few weeks, the game of cat and mouse began. Julian began visiting the Hamptons more often. He was strangely attentive, bringing her memory supplements and suggesting she see a specialist friend of his for some routine cognitive testing. Eleanor played the part perfectly. She would forget where she put her keys. She would ask the same question twice. She watched the predatory glint in Julian's eyes grow brighter every time she slipped up. But at night, while the house was silent, she was on the phone with Arthur. She was meeting with Leo in secret, helping him finalize the business plan for his dream, a historical preservation library and bookstore. She wasn't just giving him money, she was teaching him how to manage it. "Grandma, they're getting ready," Leo whispered during one of their secret lunches. "I heard Mom on the phone with a real estate agent. They're looking at the Hamptons house. They think they can list it by the end of the year." "They want to sell my home?" Eleanor asked, her voice a low hum of fury. "They think they're going to move you into Sunrise Acres by October. They've already picked out the suite. It's very luxurious," Mom said. Eleanor smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that would have terrified Julian if he had seen it. "October," Eleanor mused. "That's perfect. My 69th birthday is in October. I think it's time we planned a party, Leo. A birthday party this family will never forget." She reached across the table and took Leo's hand. "You've been a good grandson, Leo. You're the only one who didn't look at me and see a dollar sign. Remember that in the months to come. Whatever happens, you are the future of this family's heart." As the summer waned and the leaves began to turn gold in the Hamptons, the stage was set. Julian and Vivian were confident. They had the doctor's report ready. They had the real estate listing drafted. They even had the power of attorney forms printed out, tucked away in Julian's leather briefcase. They thought they were the ones holding the leash. They didn't realize that Eleanor had already built the cage. She spent her afternoons in the garden, painting. She hadn't picked up a brush in 30 years, but as she painted the stormy Atlantic waves, she felt a sense of power returning to her. She wasn't an old lady who paid for everything. She was Eleanor Sterling, and the Sterlings always settled their debts. The golden leaves of October in the Hamptons were beautiful, but to Eleanor they looked like falling coins, the dwindling currency of her family's loyalty. As her 69th birthday approached, the atmosphere in the Sterling manor shifted from neglect to a suffocating predatory attentiveness. Julian and Vivian were now permanent fixtures in the house. They had moved in to help Mother transition, as Vivian told the neighbors over bridge. But Eleanor knew the truth. They were vultures circling a carcass they thought was already dead. "Mother, you left the stove on again," Julian said one Tuesday afternoon, his voice dripping with a fake, practiced patience. Eleanor stood in the kitchen, staring at the cold burner. She knew she hadn't turned it on. She had watched Julian sneak into the kitchen minutes earlier while she was in the garden. He was creating evidence now. "Oh, did I, dear?" Eleanor murmured, letting her hand tremble slightly as she reached for a glass of water. "I could have sworn I only made tea an hour ago." "It's okay," Julian said, patting her shoulder. His touch felt like a reptile's skin. "That's why we're here. It's getting a bit much for you, isn't it? The big house, the responsibilities. Maybe it's time we talk about that lovely suite at Sunrise Acres again. I've heard they have a world-class art studio." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes wide and seemingly vacant. "Sunrise? Is that the place with the gardens, Julian? Your father always loved a good garden." "Exactly, Mother, exactly." Julian smiled, and for a moment Eleanor saw the little boy he used to be, before the greed had rotted him from the inside out. It broke her heart, but it also steeled her resolve. That night, after the house fell silent and the clicks of Vivian's heels stopped echoing in the hallway, Eleanor locked her bedroom door. She pulled a burner phone from a hollowed-out book on her nightstand, a gift from Leo. "Arthur," she whispered into the phone. "They've started the physical gaslighting. Julian is tampering with the appliances. Vivian found my pearls in the flower beds today and claimed I planted them there like seeds." "They're building a clinical profile, Eleanor." Arthur's voice was grim. "Julian has invited Dr. Sterling, no relation, ironically, to your birthday dinner. He's a psychiatrist known for discrete competency evaluations for wealthy families. If he signs off on a diagnosis of advanced cognitive decline, Julian can file for emergency guardianship the next morning." Eleanor leaned back against her silk pillows, her gaze cold. "Then we must ensure the doctor gets a show he'll never forget. How is the audit coming?" "Worse than we thought," Arthur sighed. "Julian hasn't just been borrowing from the firm. He's leveraged the Sterling Manor as collateral for a high-risk private equity loan that went south. If he doesn't pay back $6 million by the end of the month, the bank will foreclose on the house you're sitting in." Eleanor closed her eyes. The house Elias had built with his own sweat. The house where she had raised Julian. He was willing to gamble her roof over her head just to maintain his status at the yacht club. "Let him dig the hole deeper, Arthur. I want every bank statement, every forged signature, and every redirected wire transfer documented. And Leo? The boy is doing well. He's found a location for the library in a historic building in New Haven. He's nervous, Eleanor. He hates lying to his father. Tell him his courage is the only thing keeping the Sterling name honorable, she said, before hanging up. The following week, Claire returned from her honeymoon. She didn't come alone. She came with a list of demands. She arrived at the manor draped in Italian silk, her tan deep and her attitude sharper than ever. Grandma, I need to talk to you about the trust, Claire said, cornering Eleanor in the sunroom. Eleanor was busy struggling with a crossword puzzle, intentionally writing Elias in every box. The trust, dear? Is that the one for your college? Claire rolled her eyes, her patience thin. No, Grandma, my inheritance trust. Mark and I found this incredible apartment on the Upper East Side, but the co-op board requires a liquid asset statement that, well, Dad says you're holding on to the keys to the vault. He says you're being difficult because of your condition. Eleanor looked up, her expression a mask of confusion. Difficult? I just want to make sure you have enough for a rainy day, Claire. Life isn't always Amalfi sunsets. We're fine, Grandma. We just need the signature. Dad already prepared the release forms. You just need to sign where the yellow tabs are. Claire shoved a stack of papers toward her. Eleanor glanced at the documents. It wasn't just a release for Claire's trust. Tucked in the middle was a quitclaim deed for the Hamptons property. They were trying to trick a senile woman into signing away her home under the guise of a wedding gift. My hands are so stiff today, Claire, Eleanor said, dropping her pen. Maybe after my birthday party? I want to be in a celebratory mood. Claire huffed, snatching the papers back. Fine, but Dad is right. You really aren't yourself anymore. As Claire swept out of the room, Eleanor watched her go. She felt a profound sense of failure. She had raised Julian, and Julian had raised Claire. The cycle of entitlement was complete. They didn't see a grandmother. They saw a fading obstacle between them and a New York penthouse. The week of the 69th birthday arrived. The manor was a hive of activity. Vivian was overseeing the catering, but this time Eleanor noticed she was being uncharacteristically frugal. We don't need the vintage crystal, Julian, Eleanor overheard Vivian whispering in the hallway. She won't know the difference between champagne and cider at this point. Let's save the good stuff for the victory brunch on Sunday after the papers are filed. Eleanor smiled to herself. She began to play her role with even more gusto. She would wander into the living room wearing one black shoe and one navy shoe. She would refer to Julian as Elias, and then look startled when he corrected her. On Thursday, Leo arrived. He found Eleanor in the garden, staring at a rose bush. When he saw her lost expression, his face crumbled. Grandma? He whispered. Eleanor waited until she was sure Vivian wasn't watching from the terrace. She straightened her posture, her eyes clearing instantly. I'm here, Leo. Did you get the guest list? Leo let out a breath of relief. Yes. Dad invited Dr. Aris. He also invited the board of the Sterling firm. He wants them to witness your episode firsthand, so they'll vote him in as chairman emeritus with full control. Perfect, Eleanor said. And the invitations I asked you to send privately? Leo nodded. The old guard is coming. Your friends from the Historical Society, the retired partners who actually liked Grandpa, and I sent one to the local press's society columnist, just as you asked. Good. Julian wants a public performance? I'll give him a Broadway opening night. The night before the birthday, Eleanor sat alone in her room. She had a small safe hidden behind a portrait of her and Elias. She opened it and pulled out a small leather-bound diary. It was Elias's private journal from the final year of his life. In it, he had documented Julian's first discrepancies at the firm. He had written, I fear my son loves the shadow of wealth more than the substance of character. If I leave it all to him, he will burn the house down to stay warm for one night. I must protect Eleanor. She is the heart. He is merely the noise. Eleanor traced her husband's handwriting. You knew, Elias, she whispered. You knew they would come for me. She heard a floorboard creak outside her door. Quickly she closed the safe and moved to her bed, pulling the covers up. The door opened slowly. Julian stepped in, thinking she was asleep. He walked over to her vanity and began sifting through her mail. He found an envelope from Arthur Vance. He opened it, his eyes scanning the contents. Eleanor watched him through slit eyes. He was looking for the codicil, but Arthur had sent a decoy, a letter discussing a mundane change to the gardening contract. Julian hissed in frustration and tossed the letter back down. He looked at his mother in the bed, his expression a mix of resentment and pity. "Just die already, Mom," he muttered under his breath, so softly that a normal person might not have heard it. "Just go quietly so we can move on." He turned and left the room, closing the door with a click. Eleanor lay in the dark, her heart cold as ice. The last shred of maternal guilt evaporated in that moment. Julian had made his choice. He had wished for her death in her own bedroom. Now it was her turn to wish for his rebirth through the cold, hard lens of consequence. Saturday morning, the day of the 69th birthday. The manor was transformed. White lilies were everywhere. Ironic, Eleanor thought, as they were the flowers of funerals. Vivian had bought Eleanor a dress for the evening. It was a beige, shapeless shift dress that made her look frail and washed out. "It's soft on your skin, Eleanor," Vivian had lied. "We want you to be comfortable." Eleanor accepted it with a vacant smile. "It looks like a cloud, Vivian." "Will I be a cloud tonight?" Vivian laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Yes, darling, a cloud." By 7 p.m., the guests began to arrive. The sponsors from the wedding were there, the business associates Julian wanted to impress, and the silent, observant Dr. Aries, who hovered near the bar, watching Eleanor's every move. Leo was there, looking pale but standing tall. He stayed by Eleanor's side, a silent sentinel. Julian moved through the room, the perfect host. He stopped near a group of board members. "Thank you all for coming. It's a bittersweet night. Mother is, well, you'll see. We're doing our best to make her final months in the manor special." Eleanor, standing nearby, purposely dropped her wine glass. It shattered on the marble floor. "Oh, the sparkles!" Eleanor cried, pointing at the shards. "Elias, look at the sparkles!" Julian rushed over, his face a mask of concern. "It's okay, Mother. It's okay, Doctor." "Eris, would you mind helping me get her to the chair?" The doctor approached, his eyes analytical. "Mrs. Sterling, do you know where you are?" Eleanor looked at him, her lip trembling. "I'm in the garden, but the roses are made of glass tonight." Julian caught Vivian's eye and gave a small, triumphant nod. It was working. The stage was set for the final act. But as Julian led her to the head of the table, he didn't notice the 3 black SUVs pulling into the long driveway of the manor. He didn't see Arthur Vance stepping out, clutching a briefcase that contained the destruction of Julian's world, and he certainly didn't notice that Eleanor, while stumbling into her seat, had surreptitiously straightened her posture and winked at Leo. The birthday dinner began. The cider champagne was poured. Julian stood up to give a toast, the toast he intended to be his mother's professional and social obituary. "Friends, family," Julian began, his voice booming with false emotion. "We are gathered here to celebrate a woman who has been the pillar of this family. But even pillars eventually feel the weight of time." Eleanor sat at the head of the table, the shapeless beige dress draped over her. She looked like a ghost, but beneath the table, her hand was firm, holding a remote control that Leo had hooked up to the manor's integrated sound and projection system. "Mother has reached a point where she can no longer carry the burden of the Sterling legacy," Julian continued, looking directly at Dr. Aris. "And so tonight, with a heavy heart, I am announcing my assumption of full guardianship." "Julian," Eleanor said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. It wasn't the voice of a confused old woman. It was the voice that had commanded the Sterling boardroom for decades. The room went silent. Julian blinked, his toast interrupted. "Mother? It's okay, just sit back and—" "I'm tired of the beige dress, Julian," Eleanor said, standing up. She reached for the zipper at the back of the shift dress and pulled it down. Underneath, she wasn't wearing a slip. She was wearing a stunning, blood-red silk gown, the one she had bought in secret. She stepped out of the beige cloud like a snake shedding its skin. "And I'm tired of the cider champagne," she added, picking up Julian's glass of real scotch and taking a calm, deliberate sip. The guests gasped. Dr. Aris leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Mother, what is this?" Julian hissed, stepping toward her. "You're having an episode. Sit down before you embarrass yourself." "Oh, I'm not the one who's embarrassed, Julian," Eleanor said. She looked at Leo. "Leo, dear, start the slideshow." I think our guests would like to see the memories we've been making lately." Leo hit a button on his phone. Suddenly, the large mahogany-paneled wall behind the dining table retracted, revealing a massive high-definition screen. The first image wasn't a childhood photo. It was a crystal-clear video clip from the manor's hidden security cameras, the ones Julian didn't know Eleanor had upgraded. The audio filled the room. It was Julian's voice, recorded 2 nights ago in Eleanor's bedroom. "Just die already, Mom. Just go quietly so we can move on." A collective gasp ripped through the room. Vivian turned white as a sheet. Claire dropped her fork, the sound clattering against her china plate. That's a deep fake," Julian shouted, his face turning a purplish red. "This is proof of her insanity. She's hallucinating. She's attacking her own son." "Is this a deep fake too, Julian?" Eleanor asked as the screen shifted. It was a spreadsheet. A very detailed, very illegal spreadsheet showing the $6 million loan Julian had taken out against the house, followed by a series of forged signatures. Eleanor's signature, copied perfectly by Julian's hand. Arthur Vance stepped into the dining room, the light catching his silver hair. "I am Arthur Vance, legal counsel for the Sterling estate, and I can assure you the signatures have already been verified by a forensic handwriting expert this morning." Julian looked around the room. The board members were looking at him with horror. The old guard friends of Eleanor were whispering. The society columnist was typing furiously on her phone. You set me up," Julian whispered, the realization finally hitting him. "You've been faking it this whole month." "I didn't set you up, Julian," Eleanor said, walking around the table until she was standing inches from him. She looked him dead in the eye, her voice a whip crack of authority. "I simply gave you the room to show everyone who you really are. You didn't fail because of me. You failed because you thought an old woman's love was a weakness you could exploit." She turned to the room. "The party isn't over, but Julian, Vivian, and Claire, your invitations have just been revoked." The silence in the grand dining room was so thick, it felt physical. Julian stood frozen, his hand still half raised in a toast that had turned into his social execution. The guests, the board members he had tried to court, the socialites Vivian had tried to impress, stared at the screen with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. "This is private family business," Vivian finally shrieked, her voice cracking like thin glass. "Eleanor, you've lost your mind. You're humiliating us." "No, Vivian," Eleanor said, her voice calm and resonant, cutting through the panic. "I am simply making the invisible visible. You wanted me to be a sponsor. Well, a sponsor has the right to see exactly where her investment is going, and it seems I've been investing in my own destruction." Arthur Vance stepped forward, opening his leather briefcase with a deliberate click. He pulled out a single sheet of cream-colored parchment. "Julian," Arthur said, his eyes hard behind his spectacles. "Your father, Elias, was a man of immense foresight. He knew the allure of easy money could rot even the strongest branch of the family tree. That is why he added the legacy protection provision." Julian's face drained of color. That's just a scare tactic, a relic." "It is a legally binding contract," Arthur countered. "The moment you uttered those words in your mother's bedroom, wishing for her death to expedite your inheritance, you triggered the moral turpitude clause. And the moment you forged her signature on the bridge loan for this manor, you committed a felony against the Sterling Trust." Arthur turned to the room, his voice rising so every board member could hear. "As of 6 p.m. this evening, Julian Sterling has been removed as a beneficiary of the Sterling estate. His shares in the firm have been clawed back by the Central Trust. His access to all subsidiary accounts is frozen." "You can't do that," Claire cried, standing up, her Tiffany necklace catching the light. "What about my trust? What about my apartment?" Eleanor turned to her granddaughter, the girl she had pampered, the girl whose wedding she had just gifted with $1 million gala. "Claire, dear, you sat in my sunroom and tried to trick me into signing away my home. You knew your father was gaslighting me, and you chose a New York zip code over your own grandmother's sanity." Eleanor took a slow step toward her. "The apartment co-op has already been notified. The Sterling Trust has withdrawn its guarantee. You have 48 hours to vacate." The room erupted in whispers. This wasn't just a family spat. It was a financial execution. "Mom, please," Julian stammered, his bravado finally collapsing. He reached out to grab Eleanor's arm, but Leo stepped between them. "Don't touch her, Dad," Leo said, his voice surprisingly deep. You've touched enough of her life already." Julian looked at his son, the disappointment of the family, and saw a stranger. You helped her do this? Your own father?" "I helped a woman who was being hunted in her own home," Leo replied. "You stopped being my father when you started looking at Grandma like a carcass." The guests began to filter out, guided by Arthur's assistants. They left quietly, like people fleeing a crime scene. The society columnist was the last to go, her eyes gleaming. She knew she had the story of the decade, the Sterling scandal, the matriarch's bloody red birthday. By midnight, the manor was empty of guests, but the air was still electric. Julian, Vivian, and Claire sat in the library, the very room where they had plotted Eleanor's transition. Eleanor entered, still wearing the blood-red silk gown. She sat in Elias's old leather chair. She looked magnificent, the soft lamplight highlighting the sharp, intelligent lines of her face. "So what happens now?" Julian asked. He looked smaller, his expensive suit suddenly appearing ill-fitting. "Are you calling the police?" Eleanor looked at the fireplace, where the embers were glowing. "I could. The forgery alone would give you 5 to 10 years in a federal penitentiary, Julian. The firm's board would likely sue you for every penny of the redirected tax accounts." Julian put his head in his hands. "But," Eleanor continued, "I am a mother, and despite everything, I remember the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the garden. So I'm giving you a choice. A redemption clause, if you will." Vivian looked up, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Anything, Eleanor. We'll do anything." "You will sign a full confession of the forgery and the attempted guardianship fraud," Eleanor said. "Arthur will keep it in a secure vault. As long as you follow my terms, it stays there. If you ever attempt to contact a real estate agent about this house or speak a word against my mental health, the file goes to the district attorney." Julian nodded frantically. "Yes. Fine. What else?" "You will vacate the Sterling properties by Monday. You, Vivian, and Claire. I have purchased a modest 3-bedroom ranch in a suburb outside of Orlando, Florida. It is owned by a separate LLC. You may live there, rent-free, as long as you remain employed." "Florida?" Vivian gasped. "A ranch house in the suburbs?" "It has a lovely community pool, I'm told," Eleanor said, her voice devoid of pity. "Julian, Arthur has secured you a position as a junior auditor at a mid-sized accounting firm in Tampa. The owner is an old friend of your father's. He knows the truth. He will be watching you." "A junior auditor?" Julian whispered. "I was a CEO." "No, Julian, you were a thief with a fancy title," Eleanor corrected him. "Now you will learn to earn a living with the mind you were so eager to claim I had lost. Claire, you will be working at a non-profit literacy center in the same area. You've spent enough time around Tiffany Crystal. It's time you spent some time around books." "And the money?" Claire asked. "You will receive a monthly stipend equivalent to the median American income," Eleanor said. "No more, no less. If you want luxury, you will save for it. If you want a penthouse, you will build the company that buys it. The Sterling Bank is closed." Vivian looked like she was going to faint. "This is cruel, Eleanor. It's a prison." "No, Vivian. It's a life," Eleanor said, standing up. "A life you haven't had to live because I was busy being your sponsor. Now go pack. I've had the locks changed on the city apartment already. Your luggage is waiting in the hallway." 6 months later. The Hamptons were quiet, the air crisp with the arrival of spring. Eleanor stood in the newly renovated west wing of the manor. It was no longer a series of dusty guest rooms. It was a bright, airy studio filled with the scent of oil paints and turpentine. On the easel was a portrait of Leo. He was leaning against a shelf of books, a look of quiet determination on his face. "It's coming along, Grandma," Leo said, walking into the studio with 2 mugs of coffee. "It's getting there," Eleanor smiled, wiping a smudge of Prussian blue from her thumb. The light in the eyes is the hardest part, capturing that sterling spark without the sterling greed. Leo laughed. He looked happy. He had spent the last few months working alongside Arthur and Eleanor to stabilize the firm, but his true passion was coming to life in New Haven. "The library opens next week," Leo said, sitting on a stool. "The Elias and Eleanor Sterling Research Center. We've already had 3 local schools sign up for the literacy program." "Your grandfather would be so proud, Leo," Eleanor said, her voice soft. "He always said books were the only currency that never devalued." "Have you heard from Florida?" Leo asked tentatively. Eleanor set down her brush. I get a report from Arthur's friend once a month. Julian is apparently the most meticulous junior auditor they've ever had. He's terrified of making a mistake. Vivienne has started a small garden, though she complains about the humidity constantly. And Claire actually sent me a letter last week. A real letter? Yes, on actual paper. She said she taught an elderly man to read his first full chapter book. She said she finally understood why I liked the library so much. She didn't ask for money once. Eleanor looked out the window at the Atlantic. Maybe they'll find their way back to being people again. But it had to be this way. I couldn't let them drown in the gold I was pouring over them. The doorbell rang. Not the sharp, demanding ring of Julian, but a rhythmic, familiar sound. That would be Claude, Eleanor said, a slight blush warming her cheeks. Claude was a retired history professor she had met at a lecture in the city. He didn't know the full extent of the sterling fortune when they met. He just knew that Eleanor had a fascinating theory on 19th century maritime art and a laugh that reminded him of a cello. Go on, Leo teased. I'll clean the brushes. Eleanor walked down the grand staircase, her movements fluid and confident. She wasn't the old lady anymore. She wasn't a figurehead or a ghost. She opened the heavy oak door. Claude stood there, holding a bouquet of wildflowers and a slightly battered book. I found this at a shop in the village, Claude said, his eyes twinkling. A first edition of The Sea Around Us. I thought we might read a chapter or two before dinner. I'd like that, Claude, Eleanor said, stepping out onto the porch. She looked back at her home. The manor didn't feel like a cage anymore. It felt like a foundation. She had protected the legacy, not by hoarding the gold, but by pruning the dead wood and nurturing the new growth. As she walked toward Claude's modest car, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in decades. She had survived the wedding from hell, the gaslighting of her own flesh and blood, and the crushing weight of being invisible. She was Eleanor Sterling. She was a mother, a grandmother, a painter, and a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. And as the sun set over the Hamptons, she realized that the best part of her story wasn't the revenge. It was the beginning. The matriarch was no longer invisible. She was finally, truly, seen.